Robert Jenrick has told GB News that Nigel Farage's Reform UK is rattled by the prospect of him as Tory leader. Marking the second day of campaigning for the remaining two Tory leadership candidates, he vowed to cap immigration, leave the ECHR and defeat reform.
I'm going to be crystal clear. And as a result of that and my record, the fact that I fought for these policies in government and ultimately chose to resign when I couldn't get any more and make the case in Parliament and the country for change, I'm going to hopefully bring those people back to us. Make the Conservative Party the natural home for small C Conservatives again. And you're already starting to see that. People joining my campaign who had previously said that they were going to vote reform. Nigel Farage himself sounds rattled. He is worried that if the party was led by someone like myself, with my record and my policies, we would make reform redundant. That's my job. That's what I need to do.
Now, Robert Jenrick has made the bold claim that he has had Nigel Farage rattled as he vies to become the next Tory leader.
Yes, Jenrick wants to leave the European Court of Human Rights. He's made that very clear. He wants to increase deportations and also suspend foreign aid to countries that refuse to take back their own criminals. That's what he told GB News of his plan to win back Reform UK voters.
I'm going to be crystal clear. And as a result of that and my record, the fact that I fought for these policies in government and ultimately chose to resign when I couldn't get any more and make the case in Parliament and the country for change, I'm going to hopefully bring those people back to us. Make the Conservative Party the natural home for small C Conservatives again. And you're already starting to see that. People joining my campaign who had previously said that they were going to vote reform. Nigel Farage himself sounds rattled. He is worried that if the party was led by someone like myself, with my record and my policies, we would make reform redundant. That's my job. That's what I need to do.
Nigel Farage himself sounds rattled. A bold claim from Robert Jenrick, but is he right? Well, delighted to be joined by a man who should know one thing or two about Nigel Farage, the former head of communications for Reform UK, long-term spinner for Nigel Farage, Gawain Towler. Gawain, thanks for joining us.
Happy.
What do you make of that? I mean, we saw your reaction in the studio as you listened to Robert Jenrick there. You're not entirely convinced?
I think the word rattled does entertain me. The only thing's like a death rattle, but that's not Reform, who've just gone up to 90,000 members, which I suspect may well have been crossing the Tory numbers over the next few weeks, something tells me. Be interesting. And one of the things about, the business about the one nation lot not voting, they're not going to vote for either of these two. So we're not going to know the turnout, are we? We're not going to know the Tory membership figures, are we?
We're not going to know the membership figures. We will know the numbers who have voted for each. So we surmised from that, in terms of turnout last time, that the membership stood at around 160, 170,000.
It's not
but obviously
now,
things could have changed.
And if you look at the amount of money they've brought in, Dan Hannan says 90,000, around about that. It's crossover. If we're rattled, the only person that anything to do with rattling is people like Jenrick chucking theirs out of the pram.
Yeah.
His translucency, there's something not quite fully there, in the sense that when he was standing up at Tory conference, it was like a sixth form debate. The calling of names, the sort of pettiness there. And he's got this, I believe in this, I really do. You've got to believe me, I really do believe in this. And he has that, it's like a child worsted. Oh, you don't believe in that. You don't really want to leave the ECHR, do you, Robert? No, I really do. And it's this strange way of coming across.
So you say he's not necessarily trustworthy on this stuff.
I don't think he's entirely.
If he does become leader of the opposition, leader of the Conservative Party, and he's putting forward policies that you'd see in the Reform manifesto, then what is the point of the Reform Party?
It's a question of trust, isn't it? The Conservative Party, after all, for the last 20 years have been saying tens of thousands of migrants, reducing migrants, and here he is again saying the same thing. And they've deceived us every single time. So why would somebody believe that? And
well, he would say that's why he quit government. Because Rishi Sunak wouldn't agree with him when it came to immigration and getting it down.
He would say that. Dare I say, wouldn't he? And amount of times we've had these same promises. Oh, fine, he'll say that. But I don't think anybody who votes Reform or is considering to vote Reform would believe him. I'd like to know who these reform people are joining his campaign. Please do tell, Robert. I've never heard of them.
Interesting.
And I know most of the people in reform, having been around for 20 years.
So there's no one. There's no one that you know who thinks, actually, Robert Jenrick does it for me. I return to the Conservatives.
I have not met a single one.
Not a single sausage.
Not a single sausage. And apart from the else...
Or hostage.
In that... Or sausage, yes. In that time, over the last few weeks, until conference, the only way any of the Tory leadership candidates could get any column inches in any media mention was by slagging off Nigel. It was hysterically funny.
And yet, Graham...
They are fixated on him. They are
earlier
fixated
this
on
week,
him.
back when it looked as though James Cleverly might be the heir anointed to be the next Tory leader, I remember a certain Mr Nigel Farage on this television channel saying the Tories won't put Jenrick through, and Jenrick was the biggest threat to him. I mean, are we not to believe Nigel?
He may well be the biggest threat, but I don't see it as a great threat. This idea that he's rattled suggests he's quaking in his patent leather shoes. It's ridiculous.
Nigel, Nigel, Gawain. What's Nigel got that Robert Jenrick doesn't?
Integrity. A statement of belief that he has stuck to over many years, whether it's popular or not. He hasn't swung with the mood. He doesn't swing with the wind. He has people... They may not like what he says, but they believe he means it.
Is there something deeper here? That it isn't perhaps about policy, but is more about personality?
Character.
That the average Joe might prefer to have a pint with Nigel Farage than Mr Robert Jenrick?
I think that's probably true, and in fact, it's certainly true. But I think it is down to integrity. Everybody talks about it, and the volte-face that Robert came up with in the last couple of years, one wonders how... It may be authentic, but there's something in his tone that makes me doubt it.
Is it not the case, though, that reform will never have a broad enough appeal to win a general election? And so by continuing, they just make it more likely that Labour will stay in power?
I think Labour are doing a very good job of undermining that option themselves.
But when the right-wing vote splits?
Most of the Tory vote, as far as I see it, isn't particularly right-wing. These people who say they're not going to support either of these candidates. I don't think... You're right that Nigel said that. That's absolutely true. But until, a day or so ago, nobody thought... And I think that somebody made a stuff up with their numbers. I'm going to borrow you some voters to stop... Ooh, bother. And that genius from those high-powered brains in the Tory... Why would we bother? I think the country has had it with the Conservatives. I don't think that either Kemi or Robert are going to reconnect with the electorate. I think that if you look as we go forward, we've got the locals next year, but in Scotland and Wales, there's every chance, even today's polling, let alone in 2 years' time, that Reform are going to beat the Tories in both of those regions and nations. And then you start thinking, what is the point of the Conservatives? People have been asking this question for years. I certainly have, and I've never got a decent answer. Now, he's trying to propose... he basically looks at our manifesto and goes, oh, I'll have that, thank you. You don't want this, do you? No, we'll have that. And...
Well, he's the only one who's worked in the government.
Why would he just... Why would a voter go, we'll take the guy who purloined these policies rather than the guy who created these policies?
Well, we'll see if out-Faraging the Farage is actually possible or if it's all a road to nowhere. Gawain Towler, formerly of Reform UK, long-term spinner for Nigel. Thanks so much for joining us here.
Thank you very much.
Good afternoon, Preston.
Yeah.